Welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support podcasts such as Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Wednesday, January 4th, 2023. Joining me as always is my partner, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Dr. O, JOLTS report just came out today, and I'm not sure how to interpret it. It's as if the numbers didn't move from the last JOLTS report that we had received. And so I am a bit confused. So the release just came out within the last 45 minutes. So you and I are processing this thing in somewhat real time. This looks like a flat report.
That's right. I mean, it's like no news, but maybe no news is not good news because we were all expecting job openings to fall, quits to fall, and they remain unchanged. Yes, people have jobs. Yes, people are confident, and that's good. There's also the fear that with labor force participation remaining very low, or at least not increasing, you could still have some upward pressure on wage growth. The Fed has to worry about that a little bit.
Put yourself in Jay Powell's chair for a second. You are let's say that Dr. Orphe Divounguy is Jerome Powell, and you are the Fed chief. You have one report that's coming out in the next couple of days, and that's the non-farm payroll report. The anticipation on that is about 200,000 jobs will be added. What do you do from here? I mean, we've had how many increases over what period of time in the last 9 months where the ratcheting has occurred? What do you do?
Look, goods inflation is slowing, but service inflation has not. The service sector, wage intensive, right? So wage growth being very high for those in the service industries, those industries that were shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic that have rebounded now, but are still just way too hot, where there's still huge demand-supply imbalances, where you still have way too many job openings than there are available workers. Those industries are still way too hot for comfort. And that is why I think that's what the Fed has to worry about. It also means that potentially inflation might not come down as fast as it has already. Will we continue to see this quick decline that we saw in the last, I think we've had inflation slow for 5 consecutive months now, or will this next chunk here tend to be a little bit stickier? Because in the labor market, we have high demand for services, but also in the labor market, we have really high wage growth in those service industries. Look, the fear is that the labor market remains way too tight and that high price inflation will fuel high wage inflation and result in a wage price spiral. Again, the intuition, if people expect future inflation to be as high as it is today or higher, workers demand higher wages to compensate for perceived future inflation. So far, this dynamic has been contained. Instead, we've seen inflation come down, and that has helped individuals' purchasing power, right? Sustain individuals' purchasing power. It's helped households. The problem now is, will inflation continue to come down if we continue to see such labor market tightness in the service sector? That's the big question, right? And so, we still have too many job openings. Then we have workers going into these sectors, into these jobs. We did a segment earlier on immigration. It would be nice to be able to fill jobs specifically in those industries that are hiring rapidly right now. We're not there. That's a concern. I think that's a big concern. Things seem not to have changed that much, but maybe things remaining unchanged is not such good news after all.
Well, you had kind of referenced this, but, pulled from the data, the quits level, the number of people, who quit their job, that number increased by 126,000. Which took the rate, and I'm reading this directly from the CNBC story that came out this morning, that took the rate up 0.1 of a percentage point to 2.7% for a reading that is indicative of worker confidence that they can leave their jobs and find other employment. I think that's really interesting. I'm not seeing that. Maybe I'm a little bit myopic on this because I'm in the greater Chicago market. I don't see as many we're hiring signs as I did, say, prior to the Christmas season. I guess that makes sense because there are seasonal hires and whatnot. I'm just not sure what to make of it.
Look, we also have to remember this is the November report, so it's lagged a little bit. We'll see on Friday, the U.S. employment numbers come out. We'll see whether or not that pace has slowed. There's good news, right? The good news is that with inflation having come down already, households' purchasing power has gotten some support. And that means the sky is not falling and the floor is not going to be swept from under us. So that's the good news. The bad news is, where do we go from here? Are we going to continue to see inflation get slashed like it has so far from its peak, where we surpassed, I think, 9% at the start of the summer? And so that's going to be the big challenge. Are we going to be able to get close in faster on the Fed's target? Because I think the Fed is intent on going down to 2% inflation. I think it's going to be, we're on a long, bumpy ride to the 2% target, unfortunately, given where we still are, or at least where we were in November.
Well, for perspective, I mean, we're waiting to see what the December inflation numbers look like. But I mean, you know, as of the end of November 2022, we were at 7.7%. For perspective, 2022 as a year was tracking to be about 7.1% total inflation across the board. 2021 was 7%. If you go back into 2020 and 2019, the annual inflation rate for the year 2020 was only 1.4%. And in 2019, which would be the last year of normal, the number was nearly normal. We expect an inflation rate typically of about 2%. Inflation came in at 2.3%. Since then, we've seen about 3.5 times what we would expect. Take a shot in the dark here. What does 2023 look like as far as inflation?
Look, I think it's going to continue to come down, but it's probably going to come down at a slower pace. That's the unfortunate part, right? So it's good that it's coming down, but it's not coming down fast enough. What's really interesting is paying attention to market data is really important. Like places like Indeed and LinkedIn actually were able to forecast what the JOLTS data was going to be. They were able to predict where JOLTS data was going to be today relatively well. I think we need to pay more attention to this real-time data from places like LinkedIn, for example, less to this lagged government data.
On that note, let's call it to a close. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.